Ladies and gentlemen, let's RedGamingSet.com video. We're going to be discussing used games, DRM, the Xbox One, PC, and pretty much everything else under the sun, it seems. So it doesn't really take much right now to look at a particular website and see that right there on pretty much the front page is either an issue with the PS4, PC, or Xbox One and either DRM or used games. It's prevalent in the media right now, the gaming media, of course. And both the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One have been under Twitter campaigns, Facebook campaigns, websites campaigns, pretty much everything right now. Sony, of course, have said that they are really happy about the passion of their fans and almost being seen as like the white knight, if you will. They're being seen as for the gamers, and Microsoft themselves are starting to rethink some of their policies accordingly. But the question is, are used games your right, and are used games fair, and what is too far when it comes to DRM? Now, if you were screaming, of course they were your right, why shouldn't it be my right to own used games? Let's start looking at how games are right now. Now, games are becoming increasingly complicated to make. That is a given fact. They're becoming more convoluted, they're becoming more intricate, they are becoming bigger. They're becoming better, more immersive, and they are requiring much more after maintenance, by which I mean more patches, more aftercare for servers or whatever, and so forth. Now, we know that games are never balanced when they're initially released. Why? Because it's virtually impossible to either completely balance the game to get all of the bug fixes out, or, in some cases, to make it so there are no exploits available. Like, for example, let's say you put out an FPS, there may be a day one patch because of the multiplayer aspect of the game on one particular level. You may be able to, say, boost yourself or one of your teammates up to a certain point at level where you can basically become pretty much completely hidden from view, but you can snipe pretty much half the level. And worse than that, you're, for all intents and purposes, invulnerable. So, obviously that'll be patched out as soon as possible, either day one, assuming it's found, or, as soon as basically the players start exploiting it, they will release a patch to fix it. Why? Because they know that players won't be happy about it, right? And they know that if players aren't happy about it, that will mean that less players play it, because, well, news will get around that this game has some huge bugs right now, just don't get it until they've fixed it, and if it doesn't get fixed, well, less people will buy it. Secondly, less people are going to be willing to pay money for a broken game for DLC. There's some basic facts for you. Even fighting games, of course, have patches, balance patches, where they'll tone down the damage of a certain move or a certain position, or a certain character will be toned down versus another, or they'll tone down, let's say, the amount of stun a move does, or they'll increase its range or priority or the walk speed very slightly of a character. And all of these tiny little changes, what you may think is a tiny change, like, for example, they may make a move 1 frame faster. For example, they may make, say, a crouching like punch in Street Fighter 1 frame faster. And for those who don't know Street Fighter that much, or fighting games that much, it may sound an insignificant change. But in reality, it's a huge change, because that means that that character can better hang with another character. So it changes the dynamic of that entire match. Now, these are tiny patches, but the bottom line is they all require work. And then, of course, you've got the initial work of a game. Now, I mentioned many times now that games are becoming increasingly more complicated. You've got companies like Electronic Arts, of course, who are sinking millions, quite literally, into the production, the creation, and the design of games. You have graphic artists that are designing the characters and helping to bring life into the levels. You've got the level designers themselves who give the basic visions. They've got, of course, the storyboard writers, the programmers, the testers, the sound engineers, the voice actors, or maybe they even do some motion capture as well. You've got, of course, the technicians to do the character rigging and so much stuff. If you ever looked at a big game production and then looked at the list of people who make that game, you will be shocked. Because right down to the person who does the cleaning in the company. I'm not talking about code cleaning here. I'm talking about the people who actually empty the waste paper bins. They need to be paid, right? They're not just doing it because they have this love to clean waste paper bins. They, doing it because they need to feed their family and themselves. So all of this stuff costs money, and how the games developers and games publishers make this money is simple. You buy their product. Okay? You either buy their product via the actual physical media or via digital download or via DLC, but you're buying something. Now, this may sound like I'm incredibly against DRM. This may sound like I'm against used games. And this is where it gets really tricky, because in some ways I'm very much against used games, and in some ways I'm not. Now, DRM is another issue, and we'll go into that in a second, but used games, in my opinion, are not particularly great for consumers. Now, it sounds great, the extra choice, but the thing is, sometimes it's a bit of a false economy, because I'm sure those of us who even game exclusively on consoles, or those of us who game exclusively on PCs, you've probably heard of the Steam sales. It's almost invariable, in fact, that you've heard of them. And some of the discounts on there are, I'm going to go ahead and say, crazy. Like, for example, right now, Alan Wake is available on Steam for 90% off. That's right, 90%. We're not talking like 20% or 30% or even 40%. We're talking 90% off. And in the summer sales or the Christmas sales, that, honestly speaking, isn't rare. Sometimes you'll have entire publisher collections for like £50. Or you'll have like, a game for 50p, or, just a couple of pounds for a relatively decent title. We're not talking crap here. We're talking, a decent title that you'll probably want to play through at least some point in your life. You would actually like to play it. A great example of that, I bought Devil May Cry 4 for, I think it was like £1 or something. I've bought Grand Theft Auto 4 and the episodes of Liberty City for like, I think it's like £4 or £5. I'm not sure. And we're talking combined here, so we're not talking like each was 4 and 5. And on Green Man Gaming, I might as well just say the names, I can't bother to hide them. When Bioshock Infinite was being released, I bought it new for, I believe it's 23 or 24. I'm not sure exactly, but it's about that. And with that, I got The Darkness 2. I got another copy of Bioshock, the original. I got XCOM, and of course I got Bioshock Infinite, all for this price. Why? I hear you scream. Why? How? Why can they do that? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's new, and they know that there is no other way, other than piracy, that I can play those games. I can buy those games, right? This is the big thing. There is no other way, there's no other medium that can happen. I either buy it for these dudes, right, or I buy it in a shop. It doesn't matter whether it's a supermarket. For example, I'll just use UK supermarkets, but you can substitute it with whatever ones you can use it Best Buy or whatever you happen to go to in the States or Japan or wherever you happen to be from. No offense to those regions, but it just makes it easier if I just use UK examples. And I could go to, say, Tesco or whatever in the UK, and I could go ahead and buy the game there, or I could go to a shop like Game. I'm sure you guys have heard of that, especially with the financial troubles it's been under. And I could buy the game there. It's irrelevant, right? I have to buy the new game because of the way that used games have basically been phased away from PC. And in that respect, I don't even think about used games when I'm buying now, because here's the thing. Used games, they don't contribute to the sale or the development of that studio. Now, what the hell does that mean? They don't support the game series that I like. Let's take, for example, let's use a really good one. Let's use a really big... Actually, no, let's not use that big a game. Let's use Alan Wake, since we've already spoken about it. Alan Wake, but just before Steam, actually, was also on Humble Bundle, and the dude was giving it away. I can't remember his name, I'm sorry. But he was from Remedy, and they were giving away pretty much the boat with Alan Wake. They were giving away all the Alan Wakes, all of the art, all of the audio books, exclusive bits and pieces for a really cheap price, okay? Now, on the same page was a video, and one of the employees, or maybe the founder, I'm not sure, I honestly don't remember, but the important thing was that they said the reason Alan Wake 2 isn't happening yet is because basically Alan Wake 1 didn't do as well as what they'd hoped. And so they don't feel the time is right for Alan Wake 1. Alan Wake 2. Now that would not have happened if Alan Wake 1 had sold incredibly well. It's that simple. If Alan Wake 1 had sold extremely well on launch, well, everyone would have bought it. Everyone would have bought Alan Wake 1, and then, of course, Remedy would be hard at work making Alan Wake 2. It just stands to reason. The problem a lot of people have is they always say the same thing, oh my god, not another COD. But the problem is, it's a safe game. This comes down to development and publisher risk. When you've got basically a winning formula like the FIFAs or Call of Duties or whatever, you know that game is invariably going to do fairly well. Unless you do something really out of the ordinary with that title, it's going to do good. It's going to make you back your money plus some. Because there's no point in not just making back the initial amount of money. Like, let's say, for example, a game costs you $100 to develop, right? Obviously, it's far more than that, but let's just use an easy figure. Let's say it costs you $100 to develop a game, and I give you back $105. What's that? I might as well just put it into a high interest account, or, put it on the stock market or something. I would have made a hell of a lot more. It doesn't benefit the developers or publishers. It's just basically breaking even. They want to make a massive return. Or at least a return to make all of that work that they've just put in for the last, let's say, 12, 18 months, worth it. In that respect, as I've just said, new is how they get their money. Used, you lend the game to someone, or you pirate it. It's all pretty much the same to them, unless you buy DLC or an online pass, which is obviously being phased out because, well, us consumers didn't like it much. And how this basically really means, or what this really means, isn't that we didn't like it, but a simpler way of putting it is that it didn't really make EA money, and it just got them bad press. Okay? Because if it made them money, they'd probably find ways to make it slightly more palatable to the consumer, but the bottom line is it most likely just did not make them enough money to make the backlash worth it. Now, I've been listening to a lot of comments, both from social media, from YouTube, from different websites, and I think one of the issues that people really have with this whole thing is the clarity of ownership. Now, this is a huge deal. Talk for a second about old school. Now, I know what you're going to say. What the hell does that have to do with anything? But let's, hear me out for a second. Let's talk about the PS2, right? This is something near and dear to our hearts. I'm sure pretty much everyone and their mother has played on either PlayStation 2 or that generation, so might as well use it. There's no question of ownership, is there? Right? Assuming that you have a television that will work with the signal, and I'm sure you could procure one somehow or another in, say, 10 years' time. Assume that your console works and, it doesn't break from age, and it probably won't. Assume that you don't get your disc or joypads or whatever broken as well. You will be able to play that game. You will be able to play that game in 1,000 years' time, so long as, all conditions are right. There will be no reason why that title on that system will not be able to play. The problem is with digital ownership, this isn't necessarily the case, right? People all the time on PC, there are a lot of people who are really wary, should I say, about Steam or other digital services because they're just worried that their account could just get banned. I know what you're going to say. Why would they just ban you? That doesn't even make sense. Why would they just ban you? Well, bear in mind that they can ban you because, you cheat, because you buy a game from a different website, from my website, and you don't realize that key shouldn't be used on that game. For example, it could be a Russian key, and that's not allowed in, say, your region. And there are stories that, they get banned, or it could be, for example, that you walk out the room, or you go to your friend's house, and then you come back, and you find out that your brother has decided it'd be a really good idea to install wall hack cheats on whichever game, and basically cheat his way to the top of the scoreboards, get banned on the one server, do it again. You get enough complaints, and get your Steam account banned. That could be another option as well. I think people are becoming increasingly more weary about this. Wary, I don't know why I keep saying weary, but whatever. I think one of the reasons that they do is because, well, they start looking at prior history. Games for Windows. That didn't exactly go too well, did it? And in theory, the Xbox One OS could, because it's an x86-64, it could be much easier to do flawless backwards compatibility with your title. But let's say Microsoft decide eventually just to stop doing it. Let's say they decide the Xbox One just wasn't a financial success. We're going to pull the plug. I'm not saying it will be. I'm saying that it's possible. The bottom line is, as well, it's just a mark of ownership, and people don't like the idea, the thought of actually, I don't own this game. I own the right to play this game. It's like, it's almost the difference between you're renting a car versus buying a car. Now, it's not a very good analogy because there's many inherent differences between it. It's like World of Warcraft, for example. Technically speaking, Valve, what the hell am I talking about? Blizzard can basically ban you whenever they want, technically. If you look at the T's and C's, it pretty much says they can ban you if they don't like you. Now, once again, the reality of the matter is, it's not going to really happen. However, I'm sure there have been false bans issued. I'm not saying those numbers are high, but, well, I'm sure they do happen. The other problem, of course, is certain worlds, certain servers do eventually get shut down. Oh, maybe with Microsoft and this whole situation, maybe it won't be because, the activation servers, but it's still unknown. Now, this is somewhat ironic because I'm someone who owns quite a lot of games through Steam. However, it still does cross my mind. I will be completely honest. Always On DRM, however, has a number of other issues. There's a number of reasons I don't like the Xbox Online DRM, and it's not just to do with games. One of the things that really put me off with it was the whole Kinect idea. Now, obviously that hasn't been confirmed, but it's still up in the air, and I don't like, for example, how Microsoft can use statistics about you, or view how many people theoretically watching this game in your license. For example, it can detect that, okay, 4 people are watching this title, or, film title, for example. He only has rights for 3 people to watch this. Just for example, okay, theoretically we could charge him more, couldn't we? And this is the issues that people have been really ranting and raving about, because it's a lot deeper than just games. I personally don't like used games, as I've said a couple of times now, because I don't like how it doesn't support the developers. But at the same time, there has to be a level of choice for the consumer. I think that the 24-hour reconnection figure that's been bandied about, obviously that means that you have to reconnect your Xbox One to the internet of 24 hours for the games to work. That's just rubbish, right? Because 24 hours is not sufficient time. There are so many different examples of this. You've taken your Xbox around a friend's house, your internet just goes out, you're changing different ISPs, you're currently on the move, whatever, right? I've had friends that have moved to a different house and their internet, well, they're basically waiting for it to be activated. They've not even got a bloody phone line in, let alone internet connection, yeah? So they're basically waiting 2 weeks, and there is nothing they can do. They could maybe go with roaming on their phone. That's pretty much the limit of their internet connection, right? The old Facebook status here and there. Why? Because they don't have an internet connection, because the people just, well, they've not activated their line. They've got to wait for either the cable company or whatever to come in and actually physically change the lines to the home or to reactivate them or whatever, and it just happens that they're in an area where that company is very busy and they just are put on a waiting list. There's nothing they can do. Now, obviously, those situations are not often. You do not move house every day. You do not move house every year even. But still, to Valve's credit, one of the best things about it is that it can operate once you've initially activated the game. And that's the important thing, right? So you buy your title. For example, let's say that I was to buy Remember Me via Steam. And I've initiated I've bought it. I've activated it, either via Steam or by putting in the code that works on Steam, and it's now activated on Steam. So it's in my games list. I've installed it. It's mine. I can activate it, so I can play it online. Now, offline. Obviously, I won't be able to get patches. But still, I will be able to actually play the game. And that, in one respect, is one thing that I don't like about the Xbox. Because, in my opinion, 24 hours isn't big enough. In my opinion, I should be able to play that game as long as I want offline. Because I just choose to. Maybe I'm just an unsociable bastard. Maybe my internet's gone out. Maybe I'm around a friend's house. Maybe, I've taken my console around a friend's house. And let's say, for example, just example, okay, pure example. Let's say I've got the new Street Fighter. It's not been confirmed. Let's say it's Street Fighter 5, right? And let's say that I take it around my friend's house, okay? And I haven't been able to play on my Xbox One for a day or two because work or whatever reason. Just take it around my friend's house. I've got the disc, I've got the Xbox. He doesn't own an Xbox One. So I take it around his house. We're like, okay, dude, let's play some games. And then, really? I've actually got to activate this game on... I've got to just connect to your internet for a second, bro. Why? Oh, because I haven't been able to play on the Xbox in the last 24 hours. So, to do this, I'm actually going to have to quickly go onto the internet. Can I find your Wi-Fi password? I will be buggered if I've ever gone round a friend's house or anyone's house, whether I've just been fixing their PC or wanted to just use the Wi-Fi because I'm on my cell phone and it's just going to be quicker, or whatever reason. And they're like, oh, I know what my Wi-Fi password is. I don't think I've ever known someone to actually know it off by heart, and this is a really easy password, in which case it's not that secure. Because it's not something that you actually remember. To be honest, I can't even remember what my soddy Wi-Fi password is, and I'm tech. But my password is pretty obscure, to be honest, but regardless, I've got it saved somewhere or another, I think. But, this is just the problem, and obviously, it's only like 10-15 minutes. If worst comes to the worst, to reset your password. But let's say you did have to reset your password, it's just a pain in the butt. I don't like that. Now, obviously, this is really getting silly and maybe a bit pedantic, because most of the situations, they're not really going to be like this. But regardless, I think the 24-hour period isn't that particularly generous. However, given all of this information, there have been numerous studies that have said stuff like, in regards to piracy, this is a really good one. There have been studies that have been saying the effect of file sharing versus record sales, and just how much that's actually impacted record sales. And from the various studies that have been conducted, it's very limited. Okay? Even books, used books and new books, they often don't impact one another. And you guys can Google all that stuff, by the way. I'm not going to bother to tell you guys the studies, because there are a couple of them, so you can just go ahead and Google them. And this is the problem. It's a really two-sided argument. I could wax lyrically here for the next 2 hours, honestly, giving you my opinions, because it's not a simple case of Microsoft are trying to screw you over. It's a case of, well, companies like Game or GameStop or wherever you happen to be from, your local stores, they are making killings, quite literally, on the used games, and the developers and publishers aren't getting anything for it, and they are the ones that are still, well, basically suffering in some cases because their games don't sell that particularly well. Maybe they're one of those titles that sell better used, or maybe that, in your particular town or your store you go to, maybe they're aggressively trying to sell used. And I've actually have one or two friends who have worked prior in game stores, one in Game and one in actual Game Station, which used to be independent. Now it's actually owned by Game, and pretty much exactly the same story for both of them. They wanted, and by they I mean the management, they wanted them to focus on selling the used stuff because there was a bigger markup on it, right? They would, for example, sell the game for 10, and so buy the game for 10 and sell it for 20. Obviously, those are just arbitrary figures, but you get the idea. This is completely different to how it really works. You guys can look at the trade-in prices versus the sale price. So you guys are smart. You get the idea. And this is the thing, and they want a piece of that pie. And I can't blame the developers and publishers for that, because they're basically putting all the work out, and these guys are just screwing them over in that respect. Especially when you consider that there has been rumors and, thoughts and opinions that one of the reasons that digital sales are often not much cheaper than retail sales, at least initially, is because the stores themselves try to set those prices. Now, other people blame the publishers, so you're going to have to do your own you have to try and figure that one out yourselves. But regardless, it's a very, very complicated topic. And honestly speaking, I don't like the used game market because I don't feel it benefits anyone. I don't think it benefits the consumer, because it saves me £5 at best, right? And in some cases, I've actually had to take the game back. So in actuality, it's costing me the same. Because by the time I've actually paid to either get there, back to town, well, yeah, it's not much of a cost saving. But, okay, let's assume that the game wasn't scratched. Let's say it's not damaged. And let's say I was saving £5, £5, £8. It's not much. And oftentimes, it's about 5 for games. When I've been there anyway, it's about £5. Sometimes 10, but mostly 5 to 8. It's not much of a saving. And honestly speaking, I don't like the idea of spending £5 less, but getting a title that's as good as new, but in reality all it's doing is supporting that one shop. Okay? I would much rather support those who have laboured on this damn thing for 18 months and 18 months, 2 years in some cases. Like, for example, The Last of Us. Think of how long these guys have been developing this game for, painstakingly. And remember, when they initially announced the game, they'd been working on it for a long time before that, I can assure you, getting the storyboard down and everything else. It's not like it just, okay guys, look what we've managed to do today. Yeah, it's been well before that, as you guys are probably aware. At the same time, I don't like always on DRM because I think it's a bit too stringent, especially in the case of the Xbox One. I think in the case of the Xbox One, 24 hours is just ridiculous. I'm hoping it's going to be longer. I don't know how I feel about the used game, about friends borrowing games, because obviously, in their perspective, if I lend a game to my friend Tom, then he can play the game, he can complete that game, and it's just a sale that the other developers haven't gotten anyway. So it's a really tricky thing. It's one of those situations where, honestly speaking, you can't be completely unbiased in your opinion because, well, one way or another, you've got an ulterior motive. In other words, you want either games cheaper or you want to be able to better lend them to your friend or whatever. Personally, I would absolutely love it if they come up with a really good solution that's much more flexible than what we've currently got. I personally don't like used games. They are one of the reasons, of course, that games are so expensive on launch because they can't make any money other way. So imagine if used games weren't there, there's a very good chance that, honestly speaking, games could theoretically become cheaper. That isn't to say they will become cheaper, right? Because development costs are not becoming cheaper, right? They're becoming more expensive. So you'd have to kind of counterbalance that because the game would have to still sell really well, maybe even better, for the same development costs, if that makes sense, because obviously games are becoming much more difficult. So I guess it's a really, really fine line. I would encourage you guys to always buy new if you really like a game series, and that is from someone who is independent. I don't get paid from developers, I don't get paid from publishers. I actually, 99% of the time when you see a game being reviewed on this channel, there have been one or two small indie ones who have given me it, but most of the time I have to basically cough up with my own money, or sometimes the channel money, but regardless, it's pretty much the same thing, but still, Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. I'm going to be really interested to see how this is going to develop over the next couple of months, because I have a feeling we're going to know a lot more by E3. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I will see you soon. Take care and bye for now.